Hello everyone and welcome back to Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, the Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm going to build the Ancient One Commander deck, and this is part 4 of my 7-part Lost Caverns of Ixalan series. The Ancient One is a super cool commander that's really unique to Dimir, and I really wanted to build around it. So the Ancient One, a blue and a black, legendary creature, spirit god. You descend 8. The Ancient One can't attack or block unless there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. 2 blue-black, draw a card, then discard a card. When you discard a card this way, target player mills cards equal to its mana value. And this is an 8/8 creature. So my first thought instantly was something we don't see a lot in Dimir is artifact or, commander damage based commanders. This is the perfect commander to do that with because we're going to give it Descend. There's so many great aura and enchantment and equipment cards that give stuff, trample, or this can't be blocked in blue and black. So I thought this was the perfect opportunity to build this deck. So the main themes of this deck are going to be equipment and auras that give unblockable, graveyard manipulation stuff, and then a bunch of good stuff to help round out the deck. So starting out, like always, our land base, real simple, just islands and swamps. If you want to go into detail, you can, but I didn't want to waste your time. So now let's look at all of those equipment and auras that are going to help you make your commander super strong and commander damage out your opponents. So first off, we have Aether Tunnel, Aqueous Form, and Bone Horde. Aether Tunnel simply gives it +1/+0 and it can't be blocked. Aqueous Form similarly gives it this creature can't be blocked, and whenever it attacks, you scry 1. And Bone Horde is a living weapon with equipped creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Cloak of Mists, Curiosity, and Curious Obsession is next. Cloak of Mists just gives equipped creature can't be blocked. Curiosity says whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. And Curious Obsession says enchanted creature, it's +1/+1, has whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. In the beginning of your end step, if you didn't attack with this creature this turn, you have to sacrifice Curious Obsession. Next we have Eel Umbra, Fire Shrieker, and Helm of Gastlord. Eel Umbra has flash. We enchant the creature. It gets +1/+1 and has totem armor. We can use this as a bit of protection to keep our commander from dying. Fire Shrieker gives it double strike, meaning we could potentially one-shot our opponents. And Helm of Gastlord is an enchantment that says as long as it's blue, it gets +1/+1, and whenever you deal combat damage to an opponent, draw a card. And as long as it's black, you get +1/+1, and whenever this deals combat damage to an opponent, that player discards a card. Next up, we have Helm of the Host, Kai's Ghost Form, and Lightning Greaves. What's better than one commander? 2, and Helm of the Host can do that. If you have this equipped to your commander at the beginning of combat on your turn, you create a token that's a copy of your commander. It isn't legendary and has haste. Unfortunately, it's too late to equip things at that point, but you still get another 8/8 very easily, so that's pretty good. Kai's Ghost Form, also a little bit of protection. If our commander would die, it's returned to the battlefield. And Lightning Greaves gives our commander haste and shroud, meaning we can attack right away and prevents our opponents from doing anything to it. Luxodon Warhammer, Phyresis, and Security Bypass are next. Luxodon Warhammer gives it +3/+0, it gains trample and lifelink. Phyresis gives infect, meaning if we can make it unblockable and give it 2 more power, it's just going to one-shot a player by giving them enough poison counters to kill them. And Security Bypass says as long as enchanted creature is attacking alone, it can't be blocked. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, it connives, meaning we're going to get a little bigger every time. Next up is Shadow Spear, Sleeper's Robe, and Swiftfoot Boots. Shadow Spear is going to help buff us up, give us trample and lifelink, and remove hexproof and indestructible from our opponent's stuff. Sleeper's Rights makes it so our commander can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or black creatures. And Swiftfoot Boots gives us hexproof and haste. And lastly, we have Trailblazer's Boots, Vanishing, and Whispersilk Cloak. Trailblazer's Boots makes it so if our opponents have any non-basic lands, they can't stop us from hitting them. Vanishing makes it so we can phase out our commander. Maybe there's a board wipe going on, maybe there's something that they're trying to target our commander with, we can just phase it out so it can't be targeted. And Whispersilk Cloak just gives us unblockable and shroud. So now I want to dive into some of the other cards I've included. The way that I've kind of structured this deck is a little bit of mill, a little bit of recursion, all that sort of stuff. But before we do, I just want to say, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, please do so. This is episode 4 of 7 for my daily Lost Caverns of Ixalan decks. For the rest of the week, I'll have more videos out, and I've already posted 3 of them at this point. So if you're enjoying this and you want to see more like that, go watch them on my channel and subscribe to stay tuned to see more. It would really mean a lot to me. So this next set are Graveyard Matters cards. So we have Animate Dead, Blood Chief's Ascension, and Consuming Aberration. The main goal of this deck is to use your commander to deal a ton of damage, but maybe you're at a different point and you want to power up some other stuff or do things different ways. That's why I included these cards. So Animate Dead, obviously a great card because we can reanimate anything from a graveyard, and it just gets -1 to its power. Bloodchief Ascension says at the beginning of your end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you can put a quest counter on it. Then whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you can have the player lose 2 life and you gain 2 life, making it so if you mill them out, you can gain a lot of life and deal a lot of damage in the process. In Consuming Aberrations, power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards, and whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land and puts those into their graveyard. Next up, we have Cruel Somnophage, Crypt Incursion, and Dimir Doppelganger. Cruel Somnophage is an adventure card from the wilds of Eldraine that says, one of blue can't wake up. Target player mills 4 cards, and then its creature side is a creature nightmare with Cruel Somnophage's power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Crypt Incursion says exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. If your opponent is playing a creature heavy deck and you're milling them out, this is a great way to gain a ton of life. And Dimir Doppelganger, for 1 blue-black, exile target creature card from a graveyard. This becomes a copy of that card and gains this ability, meaning we can just take advantage of some of the best stuff that's been milled or put in the graveyard so far. Next up, we have Drown in the Loch, Duskmantle Guildmage, and Extract from Darkness. Drown in the Loch has this counter target spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard, or we can destroy target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Duskmantle Guildmage is one of my favorite cards ever printed. For 1 a blue and a black, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, that player loses 1 life. Then for 2 blue-black, target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his graveyard. And I'm going to get to it here in a minute, but it works particularly well with Mindcrank, and I'll explain why then. And our next card is Extract from Darkness. This is a sorcery that has each player mill 2 cards, then you put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Our next 3 cards are Guilt Feeder, Likeness Looter, and Mindcrank. Guilt Feeder has fear, and whenever it attacks and isn't blocked, defending player loses 1 life for each card in their graveyard. This is going to work great again with all of those things that say we can't be blocked, just making it so they're going to lose a lot of life. Likeness Looter is very similar to Dimir Doppelganger, and it says, flying, tap, draw a card, and discard a card. In X, Likeness Looter becomes a copy of target creature card in your graveyard with mana value X, except it has flying, and this ability activate only as a sorcery. So it might be slightly better because it gives flying, but at the same time, it does cost a lot more if you're trying to copy a big thing. And Mindcrank, probably one of the best cards for any mill deck. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player mills that many cards. This can be any damage or just life loss in any way. So if we pair that up with Duskmantle Guildmage's first ability, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere this turn, that player loses 1 life. It's going to cause this to trigger. They're going to mill a card, lose a life, mill a card, and that process will go on until their library is empty. Next up is Mirkovask Minddrinker, Mortivore, or Psychic Corrosion. Mirkovask Minddrinker is a legendary creature vampire with flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, that player reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals 4 land cards and put those cards into his or her graveyard. Mortivore is a creature that's power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, and for a single black, we can regenerate it. And Psychic Corrosion is an enchantment that whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of the library into their graveyard. Next up, we have Psychic Strike, Reanimate, and Spark Double. Psychic Strike counters target spell. Its controller puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his graveyard. Reanimate, for a single black sorcery, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and you lose life equal to its mana value. I love Reanimate. It's going to be super great in this deck, just milling out a bunch of stuff to get a big creature. And Spark Double is a creature illusion that we can have enter the battlefield as a copy of a planeswalker or creature. If it's a legendary creature, it isn't legendary. If it's a planeswalker, it isn't legendary. And it gets either a +1/+1 counter or an additional loyalty counter if it's a creature or planeswalker. And lastly, we have Visions of Beyond and Rite of the Precinct 6. Visions of Beyond is an instant that says draw a card. If a graveyard has 20 or more cards, draw 3 instead. And Rite of Precinct 6 is a zombie that says Rite of Precinct 6 gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your opponent's graveyard. So you can kind of see here the big strategy is we have a couple creatures that just get very big or deal a lot of damage for the number of cards in all graveyards. So lastly, I want to talk about some of the good stuff, some of the other things to help round out this deck, help you kind of stay in the game and get to those cards that you need. So starting off, we have an Offer You Can't Refuse, Arcane Signet, and Brainstorm. An Offer You Can't Refuse is just a great counter spell that's very cheap and gives your opponents 2 treasure tokens. Arcane Signet is going to help you filter for mana, and Brainstorm lets you draw some cards and put some on top. Counterspell, Damnation, and Dimir Signet are next. Counterspell, gonna counter any spell. Damnation destroys all creatures that can be regenerated. This is very good if you're falling behind and need some way to reset the board. And Dimir Signet is gonna tap for 1 colorless to gain you a blue and a black. Feed the Swarm, Mystic Grimoire, and Notion Thief are next. Feed the Swarm is a great card because it's one of the only ways you can get rid of enchantments in this color combination. You are going to lose some life, but that's okay. Mystic Grimoire is a single blue that lets you draw a card whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, unless they decide to pay 4, which nobody ever does. It does have cumulative upkeep, meaning that you have to pay an additional 1 every turn, but if you're just getting enough mana and great cards, you're going to continue to have this on the battlefield. And Notion Thief, probably one of the meanest cards. It is flash, and if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw it instead, meaning if someone's going to try and draw a bunch of cards, you can flash this out and draw those cards. Next is Phyrexian Arena, Preordain, and Propaganda. Phyrexian Arena is a commander staple that has some controversy. Some people really hate it, some people really like it. I threw it in this deck because I like it. Preordain lets you scry 2 and lets you draw a card, and Propaganda makes it so your opponents can't attack you unless they pay 2 for each creature. Shieldred, Silent Arbiter, and Sol Ring are next. Shieldred is the last version of Shieldred we're going to get, but when it enters, each opponent sacks a non-token creature or planeswalker, and then 4 and a black, exile it and return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery and only if opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. And we get the True Scripture. Number 1, for each opponent, destroy up to 1 target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Number 2, each opponent discards 3 cards, then mills 3 cards. And number 3, put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. Exile the True Scriptures, then return it to the battlefield. This is a perfect card for any Reanimator deck or any deck that cares about dumping a lot of stuff in the graveyard, because we're just going to be able to get everybody's everything and just deal a ton of damage to their hand and board in the process. Silent Arbiter, one of my favorites because of our commander. It's real commander focused. No more than 1 creature can attack each combat, and no more than 1 creature can block each combat, meaning that we're just going to swing in with our commander and really don't have to worry about a bunch of people swinging back and hitting us, unless this gets removed, obviously. And Sol Ring, one of the best artifacts in the game, obviously needs to be put in here. Next up, we have Talisman of Dominance, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and Reality Chip. Talisman of Dominance either taps for a colorless, or we can tap it for a black or blue and deal 1 damage to us. Tasha's Hideous Laughter says each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until that player has exiled cards with a total mana value of 20 or more. And the Reality Chip is a great thing we can equip to any one of our creatures or maybe our commander. This lets us look at the top cover of our library anytime, and as long as it is attached to a creature, we can play lands and cast spells from the top of our library. Next up, we have Toxic Deluge, Treasure Cruise, and Tree of Perdition. Toxic Deluge says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, we pay X life. All creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. Because our commander is so big, you can basically wipe the board but leave our commander up and ready to swing in. Treasure Cruise lets us delve cards from our graveyard, and if we do, we can draw 3 cards. We gotta be careful though, because if we delve too many, our commander can't attack. And Tree of Perdition has Defender, and we can exchange target opponent's life total with Tree of Perdition's toughness. This can be a very easy way to lower an opponent's life total and then just swing in with our commander to win. And lastly, we have Wall of Frost, a creature wall with Defender, and whenever Wall of Frost blocks a creature, that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Well, that is it. What do you think of this deck? Do you agree with the cards I included? Do you agree with the strategy? How else would you build the Ancient One? This is kind of a really unique card, but in my mind, an 8/8 for 2 mana that you only have to have 8 cards in your graveyard and it's an awesome creature. I don't see this deck being built in really any other way, and I would love to hear about it. What do you think? What cards would you include? What cards would you remove? Please leave it down in the comments down below. And like I said earlier, please subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned. I'm trying to hit 1,500 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you guys would help me do that, it would just be so amazing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, we have today's Scryfall card of the day, which is Pariah's Shield. To bear the shield of the Pariah is the highest honor a Boros can receive, and the last. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.